The next few weeks, we will be looking at Easter. We'll be looking at probably some of the symbols and some of the people around there and just all sorts of things. This morning, we are going to look at one of the greatest things that I think that Jesus tried to teach, not only the apostles there, but probably tries to teach us now. That's the act of service. We realize what we're going to look at this morning. So if you have your Bibles in the 13th chapter of John, we're going to look at the first 17 verses in that. It says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. As supper being ended, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and had given all things, and that he had come from God and he was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter and said to him, Lord, you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash your feet, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said unto him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him before he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. We look at this, what we fail to realize, this is just hours before his betrayal. This is just, it's significant in its timing. Because why? Because Jesus was preparing for the cross. How do we know that? Because it said his hour had come. And what we realize is he is leaving those whom he loved dearly a critical message. Often what we see here is last minute orders. Now we look at foot washing and we do realize that in our culture today, we think, that's really not something that's practiced anymore, but it is. There's other denominations that have special services set aside where they practice this. However, we don't, which I'm kind of glad we don't. You probably are too. But what we see in this time, in this place, it was a cultural necessity. What do I mean by that is this. It was necessary because of the footwear. Now, they wore sandals everywhere they went. Of course, they didn't have blacktop roads. They didn't have concrete sidewalks. They'd have gravel driveways. Everywhere they went was pretty well dirt. And what we see cultural necessary is necessary because of the filth on the road. It is also a dining courtesy. We would see at the very least, host would provide a basin and water at the door. As guests arrived, they would remove their sandals and wash their feet. It was necessary. Hosts might provide women, children, and Gentile slaves to wash the feet of others when they came in. It was too degrading for a Jewish man to do this. And what we see is this, what we are going to look at, the question that we're going to look at is what was so remarkable about these 24 feet that Jesus was about to wash. First thing we see is this, that Jesus washed these dirty feet. Now, the disciples were not bothered by the dirt. The water, the laver, or the wash bowl had been provided. Any of them could have washed their own feet. Now, what we see by the cultural thing, it was always customary. It was just what you do when you came in. My mother taught me growing up as a child that when I went into somebody's house to take my shoes off. Try it. My socks might be holding, but you take your shoes off when you go to somebody's house. That's just what you did. I've had people tell me since then, oh, don't take them off. Don't take them off. I said, listen, my mother will come back and haunt me if I don't. But it was something I was ingrained to do. I don't think nothing about it. I'll just automatically do that. And that was what was customary about this. It was just customary when you went to somebody's house that you took your shoes off and you washed your feet. The Pharisees were more concerned about the dirt on the hands than on the feet. Anyone could, but no one did. We see the dirt needed to be washed away. To one who lives in dirt, Jesus' concern appears to be kind of extreme when you think about this. But we see Jesus did something that no pastor is supposed to do. He made people feel awkward, which is an unwritten rule that you're not supposed to do. Well, he rose from the table, picked up the basin, removed his dress coat, and performed a task too degrading for anyone else in that room to do, which is why we're here, is what we're looking at. We see the hardest people to love are those that we are called to love, isn't it? Now, when we realize this, can you imagine how awkward those disciples felt as Jesus had told them what he was about to do? Could you just picture this? John, as he told them what they needed to wash one another's feet. John, you wash Peter's feet. You can just hear John now, the words John would be speaking. Oh, no, he has a big mouth. He's always bossing others around. He thinks that he should lead everybody. As Jesus started would tell Matthew to wash Simon's, the Zealot's feet. You can just hear Matthew, his words would say, oh, he and I just don't see on things the same way politically. He's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, and we just don't see eye to eye on things. I just really don't need to be doing that. He has some pretty extreme views. I don't think for one moment that, we think that as we look at the apostles and all that, the early church, that, everything was in harmony as way everything was growing. But the things that we fail to realize, and if we look at Scripture and read the Gospels, we'll see that a lot of the apostles sometimes didn't get along very well. And I don't think for 1 minute that they weren't squabbling behind the back of Jesus, thinking that he didn't know what was going on. But we ask the question to ourselves, what about our brothers' feet? The people that we associate with, or should I say the people we refuse to associate with, are the ones that we're called to love, isn't it? When we think we look at this passage and the real root of the thing is it's about servanthood. And what we realize is Jesus is telling us to serve those. It's what he's trying to teach his apostles about this servant. And what we realize are those that is so hard to love that we think, oh, well, it's really not my problem. Somebody else will do it. We'll let the Holy Spirit appoint somebody or they'll just deal with that on their own. They'll find out the best way they can. The thing that we fail to realize is this: Jesus is not asking us to do something that he has not already done. I'm not saying that, and I'll tell you, if we are honest about it, if we're sitting here this morning and all of a sudden somebody would just walk out of one of these rooms with a wash basin and a towel and just reach down and take your shoes off and take your socks off and start washing your feet, we would be uncomfortable, wouldn't we? I would be. And I'm sure you would be too. I would have that Peter syndrome. You're not washing my feet. Because why? You know, would we think it's just really not our place? We have that awkward feeling because, you know, we kind of like things kind of private, don't we? To a certain extent. I mean, our feet are all covered up, and we really don't want nobody doing that because we'll feel obligated, kind of, if we're honest about it. The second thing that we look at is this. We see first Jesus washed dirty feet. We see next that Jesus washed double-minded feet. Now, what we realize about them, as we already pointed out in that first verse, that Jesus knew that his hour had come and he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own as who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And like I said, Jesus knew that, you know, in just a very short time, these that were sitting around the table, these 12 that were so dear to him, that were so close to him, these his personal friends, these that had been with him through thick and thin, these that have spent days and nights with him, these that have sat around and learned his teaching, these that were his core group, was about to do just hideous things to him. And what do I mean by that? You know, the question that we think of when Jesus picked up that basin and that towel, you kind of wonder, what did Jesus know what was going on? Of course he did. But you know, I can't help but wonder, you know, he knew the time of his greatest needs was at hand. He knew that every one of these 12 disciples would, to one degree or another, abandon him. Just think about that for a minute. Sometimes it's hard to do for people, isn't it? But would it not be harder knowing, going in, that they were going to turn their back on you? That they really didn't care nothing about you? Well, not to that extent, but they were going to abandon you in your greatest time of need. That's what Jesus is, but you know, Jesus did not perform this in ignorance. He understood where those clean feet would take these disciples within the next 24 hours. And what we realize is the master gives freely in spite of knowing all would forsake him. How do we know that? First thing, he washed the betrayer's feet. This guy by the name of Judas, which we've heard this story over and over again. Because as we know, it already said in those first 3 verses that Satan had already entered in Judas's heart. And so as Jesus was there, as he took his sandals off, took his foot up and put it in that wash basin and was washing, he knew that in Judas's heart, he'd already betrayed him for the price of a slave. Ooh, I tell you, that would be tough, wouldn't it? You know, and I wrote down here, Judas acted calm and complainant. You know, how in the world could Judas get to that point in time, knowing that would be just like us, going to commit a horrendous sin and it not bothering us whatsoever? But that does happen, doesn't it? You know, it starts off, we don't start off that way, but I don't think Judas all of a sudden just got this way. It starts off, you know, you'll sin a little bit and you know, it'll make us feel bad. And And we'll go to God and say, God, I'm sorry, I won't do it anymore. Then the next time, it doesn't seem to kind of sting as bad. And the next time it doesn't. And before long, it takes a very short period of time. All of a sudden, it just doesn't bother us whatsoever. Because why? I think that Satan will harden our hearts if we give him just a minute. And if we just do that for just a second. Judas thought no one knew of his plans. Perhaps Judas even thought, oh, Jesus, he don't know. He just has no. I'm not saying Judas was smirky about it. But, I can't help but think, as Jesus was washing Judas's feet, Judas's mind was like, he just doesn't have a clue what's about to happen to him. And, probably if we are serious about it, there's times in our life where we've probably thought the same thing about Jesus. The things that we do, we thought, he don't know. Of course, our motto, what they don't know won't hurt us, right? Second thing that we saw is, how he treated hypocrites. In hours, those feet cleaned by Jesus would lead a band of soldiers to the Garden of Gethsemane to arrest Jesus. His heart was dirty to the core, yet his feet were cleaned by Jesus. Judas, after everything I did for you, how could you do this to me? The next thing that we see is Jesus washed sprinters' feet. What do I mean by that? There were many things that Jesus did that surprised them. Within hours, those feet cleaned by Jesus would flee from the garden in fear. Other words, that these feet that he washed, when the soldiers came with the swords and to arrest Jesus, these were the ones headed for the hills. These were the ones that we will see in a week or two that they were there at the Garden of Gethsemane. They were there at the garden with Jesus and couldn't stay awake to pray with him in his deepest, darkest hours. They would flee, with the exception of John. None would see Jesus till Easter evening. They would not say that they knew him for fear, but their feet were clean. He washed a denier's feet. Of course, we know who that is. What did Jesus think when he washed the feet of Peter? I like Peter. Peter, one thing about it, you didn't ever think about what he thought, and he was always wide open. Peter was. Peter objected to this kindness. He told Jesus, he said, you're not washing my feet. Peter would profess loudly that his cause and his care for Jesus would never fail. Remember the words Peter said? Oh, I'll go with you to the grave. I'll never deny you. Oh, you're sadly mistaken. All these other ones might, but as for me, I'm with you all the way to the end. And what we realize that Jesus told Peter exactly what would happen. And we see within hours, Peter would be in tears because he did exactly what he said he would not do. We've all ended up there where Peter's at. We've all made deals with God, and we've all said, God, I promise if you get me out of this, I'll never do this again. I promise if you just make this right, I'll never stray again. I promise if you do this one thing, I'll be yours forever. And the very thing that we promised that we would not do, it seems like before we can turn around twice, is exactly what we're doing. But now think about this. I think it's something that we don't never realize. As loudly as Peter praised Jesus in private, he denied him this loud in public. But his feet were clean. This may seem quite harsh. There's no guarantee on this earth that the people that we care about will care for us. It's a hard path to take. But, Jesus is not asking us to go where he has not already gone before. There's not anything that Jesus will lay on your heart that he's not already worked out. We think that all this is so hard to do, but all Jesus wants us to do is trust and obey. Is what it wants. We make things so complicated. The third thing that we see is this. Jesus washed the disciples' feet so that they would one day imitate him. We ask, what are disciples? And, I've heard people ask me this. Disciples are by nature are those who imitate their masters. Without words, Jesus taught them what they can and must do. But the thing is this, if he had spoken these words, it would have been easy to manipulate them. I know where I work is just like how everybody else at work does. Somebody will tell somebody to tell somebody something. And they'll tell one person, and time it goes to the other person, it's changed just a little bit. And if you're the third or fourth person down, then what you get told is not nothing like the very first person told them to tell you. Jesus knew if he had told one to pass it on, you know what'll happen? It won't be very long. One of them say, "You're not the boss of me. I don't have to do that." What Jesus did is far more important than that, wasn't it? When he came, took his outer garment off, reached down and picked up the wash basin, picked up the towel, and went around and did that. Those actions spoke far more than words, didn't they? When we think about what Jesus has called us to do, when we look at this passage here, we realize that Jesus tells us that action is necessary. Jesus asked the disciples if they understood what he had done, and it's not likely that they did, so he explained it. He had given them a lesson in humble service, an example for them to follow. The world thinks that happiness is the result of others serving us, but real joy comes when we serve others in the name of Christ. The world is constantly pursuing happiness, but that's like chasing a shadow. It is always just beyond our grasp. And what we realize is this. We look at ourselves and we ask ourselves, what excuses do I have? Do I understand what Jesus wants us to do? Yes, he wants us to serve. But do I think he's asking me to do something that is impossible? And the answer to that is no. He's not asking us to do something that is impossible. He's asking us to do something that he has already done. So we need to ask ourselves prayerfully, what does Jesus want us to do this week? So many times when we think about things, we think about, well, it's so generic. And I wrote a couple of these things down. It says, what can I do to wash the feet of another this week? Now, I'm not saying you go into work and reach down and your co-workers take their shoes and socks off. And I'm not telling you to do that. Symbolically, what can you do to serve somebody this week? Not figuratively, literally. You say, well, I don't know. What can I do that would cause this world to marvel because they would never stoop that low? What can I do that would cause this world to say, oh, you must be one of his disciples? You know, when we think about our life, we think about where it is and what he has called us to do. And we realize so many times, we think that it takes a grand act, a big showing, a great big thing to do. But you know, folks, you've heard me say this a million times. It's the little things in life that we do that make the biggest impact. If you stop to think in your life and what people have done, the things that stick out the most are the little things that's been done. Not the grand scheme of things, but it's the little things that make all the difference in the world. So when we read the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, we may think that we understand what he was doing. John, for instance, was a close friend. Then there was Peter and Andrew, who had been faithful in following the master. Each of the disciples must have had something that endeared him to Jesus. And you know, I can understand that. I can understand him doing the disciple because he knew what they were going to do. He knew that even though Peter was going to deny him, that Peter was going to be great. You know, Peter's going to be the rock of the church. You know, all the disciples. But you know, you think about them and the great things they were going to do. Then there's Judas. And Jesus knew. He knew about Judas. What a doubt in his mind about that. But yet, in spite of all that, Jesus still washed Judas's feet. That's hard one right there, isn't it? You just think of your worst enemy doing something like that for him. That's hard. That's a hard one to swallow right there. But you know, the realization of it is we will never get to where we need to be until we get that humble spirit. That's hard. And the realization Jesus was performing the most menial of tasks for a person who treated the creator of the universe as being someone worth no more than 30 pieces of silver, knowing the one whose name is associated with giving life, got his hands dirty to serve the ones whose name would stand for betrayal and death the rest of the time. I can just say this. Jesus did that in spite of. Well, let's just make this personal. Look at the things that we have done. And Jesus still loved us. And aren't we glad that he did? That he didn't say, well, you know, I know what you did, so you're lost. You're out of it. Better luck. But he didn't. And that's a great thing. You know, we might be sitting here today thinking, oh, man, you know, there's this one thing that I wish that, you know, Jesus knows. He knows everything about your life. So the one thing holding you back, aren't you willing to give it up, to give it to him? You know, maybe you've never accepted him. Maybe there's some things that you just can't get over. You just need to give them up to him. Say, Jesus, you know, I just have a hard time with these. Just take them away from me. Whatever it is, won't you allow him to take you to the next level? I'm going to ask as we stand, as the song leader and musicians come this morning. Every head bowed, every eye closed.